Honourable Chrystia Freeland, the Minister of Global Affairs, and we want to thank her very much for taking this time to spend with us. So as is our normal process here in committee, we will ask the Minister to make her presentation, and then we'll go through a series of questions and answers. And as you know, the chair tends to be fairly lenient in how we do these things, so everybody just relax and everybody get their questions in, and it'll all go good. So with that, I want to turn the floor over to Minister Freeland and for her presentation. And again, thank you for appearing.
Okay. Well, I would like to thank our chair and the committee for the opportunity to join you all here today. And before I begin, I have some prepared remarks, a few things I'd like to say off the top. But before I begin, I would like to introduce two outstanding Canadian public servants who are here with me. I think everyone in Canada now knows Steve Verheuel, our chief negotiator. I was about to say of CETA, which he is, but also right now significantly of NAFTA. And thank you for being here with us, Steve. And with me also is David Morrison, who has recently been named our Associate Deputy Minister of Global Affairs. David has been doing terrific work on a number of files, but most particularly, he's a Latin America expert and has been leading our effort on Venezuela. So, muchas gracias, David. And for the Albertans here, he's from Lethbridge. Monsieur le Président, honorables membres, je vous remercie.
Mr. Chairman, honourable members, thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development about how our government is following up on its priorities with respect to foreign policy. Last June, in the House of Commons, I presented Canada's priorities for foreign policy. And the basis of these priorities is that they are founded on the importance of maintaining stable and rules-based international order. Our government takes advantage of Canada's world presence, our long tradition, in order to speak with a loud voice to defend against intolerance and excessive nationalism and meet the needs of legitimate concerns. This means that we need to show constructive leadership in the international arena, work with our partners to promote peace, security, and prosperity around the world. And this is exactly what our government is doing.
The G20, the OAS, the World Trade Organization, in the Commonwealth, La Francophonie, and NATO, to name just a few, Canada today is engaging creatively to navigate the complexities of today's world. And we are doing so, Mr. Chair, not only in word, but also in deed. We have shown that Canada can lead and assemble partners to find solutions to the world's most pressing global challenges. In October in Toronto, I hosted the third ministerial meeting of the Lima Group on Venezuela. Foreign ministers from over a dozen countries convened to discuss steps needed for a peaceful return to democracy and to relieve the terrible suffering of the Venezuelan people. I repeated this message once again 2 weeks ago in Chile at the fourth Lima Group meeting, as well as the importance that Canada's sanctions against Venezuela have in our efforts to achieve these goals. The issue of Venezuela was further extensively discussed at the North American Foreign Ministers meeting last Friday in Mexico City, and we may be holding another meeting of the Lima Group in Lima next week. That's under discussion. Just a couple of hours ago, I spoke with the Peruvian foreign minister about that possibility. With the United States, Canada also recently hosted the Vancouver Foreign Ministers meeting on security and stability on the Korean Peninsula. This was an essential opportunity for the international community to demonstrate unity against and opposition to North Korea's dangerous and illegal actions, and to work together to strengthen diplomatic efforts towards a secure, prosperous, and denuclearized Korean Peninsula. Likewise, on Myanmar, I'm proud of Canada's leadership and cross-party support for that leadership. Too often in diplomacy, it is said that words do not matter, but they do. It is significant that Canada was one of the first countries to denounce the crimes against humanity and the ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya. Since the beginning of 2017, Canada has contributed $37.5 million to help address the needs of affected people in Myanmar and Bangladesh. This includes $12.5 million the government contributed to match the donations of generous and concerned Canadians. And I would really like to thank and congratulate all the Canadians who took part in that. And that is why we have appointed Bob Rae, a friend and an exemplary Canadian, as Special Envoy. As a non-Muslim majority country, it's particularly important that Canada speaks out in defense of this persecuted Muslim minority. When it comes to Ukraine, I was delighted to travel to Kyiv in December and to meet with President Poroshenko, Prime Minister Groysman, and Foreign Minister Klimkin. I conveyed our unwavering support for Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty and spoke about our recent addition of Ukraine to the automatic firearms country control list, something the Ukrainians thanked me for. Last June, I also said we would take strong steps to ensure that all human beings are treated with dignity and respect, based on our strong commitment to pluralism, human rights, and the rule of law. Since then, we adopted the Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act, and thank you for the support of everyone around this table for that measure, to enable Canada to take action against individuals who commit serious violations of human rights and those who engage in significant acts of corruption anywhere in the world. I want to thank all the members of this committee for your important work on this legislation. It truly would not have happened without this committee's leadership. A very, very important contribution. Nous continuerons de dénoncer fermement.
We will continue to speak out strongly against all forms of injustice and intolerance around the world, as we have done in the case of Yemen, Chechnya, and Iran over the last few months. You have heard me talk about women and girls. As I said in June, it is important for the Prime Minister and the government identify proudly as being feminists. This is a historic milestone. The rights of women are human rights, and they are at the heart of our foreign policy. And this is why we are determined to promote an ambitious feminist foreign policy. This commitment is at the core of our feminist international aid policy, which was launched in June by my colleague Marie-Claude Bibeau, the Minister of International Development, and at the core of the new action plan to help women and promote peace and security that I announced in November. I know that a number of members here of the committee contributed to this work, and I want to thank you once again. At the conference held in November, bringing together defense ministers of countries that take part in UN peace missions, Canada launched the ELSI initiative to promote participation by women in peace operations, not only to make sure that more women could participate, but also to guarantee that there would be good conditions for their long-term participation. The ELSI initiative was designed to improve the overall effectiveness of UN operations. We will be playing host to experts from a number of countries this month to look at next steps.
Cherished democratic values that stands for human rights is strong. We must continue to be a global leader and keep working hard to protect these values and rights. And on this point, I would like to directly address an issue that has received important scrutiny in Canada: arms exports. Last summer, we became aware of media reports that the possible misuse of Canadian-made vehicles in security operations in Saudi Arabia's eastern province. At that time, I asked officials at Global Affairs Canada to conduct a full and thorough investigation of these reports. Today, I can confirm that officials at Global Affairs found no conclusive evidence that Canadian-made vehicles were used in human rights violations. That was the independent, objective opinion of our public service and the advice given to me as minister. This experience did, however, cause me to pause and re-examine Canada's export permit system. My conclusion is that Canada can and must do better. Canada is not alone in the world in taking stock of how we allow and monitor the export of arms and of the considerations that go into these decisions. I have spoken with my counterparts in Germany, Sweden, and the Netherlands, among others, whose countries have all recently, in one way or another, questioned how arms are exported. I'm proud of the important commitment that our government made with Bill C-47. This would amend the Exports and Imports Permit Act to allow Canada to accede to the Arms Trade Treaty. This is the first treaty to tackle the illicit trade in conventional weapons, and it sets an essential standard for the international community. It is long overdue that Canada joins many of our NATO and G7 partners by acceding to the ATT. We have heard support for the Arms Trade Treaty from civil society, from NGOs, and from Canadians. We also heard the clear desire to do better. We need to be ambitious and strengthen Bill C-47. We had originally planned to place the criteria by which exports are judged, including human rights, into regulation. But we heard from committee members and civil society that they would like to see the Arms Trade Treaty criteria placed directly into legislation. This would include the consideration of peace and security, human rights, and gender-based violence. I can say today that this is something the government would welcome. Going further than that, our government is today announcing that its support for the inclusion of a substantial risk clause in Canadian law. Such a clause would mean that our government, and indeed future governments, would not allow the export of a controlled good if there were a substantial risk that it could be used to commit human rights violations. A substantial risk clause would mean that Global Affairs Canada would need to ensure, before the export of controlled goods, that we have a high level of confidence that controlled exports will not be used to commit human rights abuses. Il s'agit là d'une décision importante, puisqu'elle aura.
This is an important decision because it will have an impact on how Canada regulates the sale of arms. But it is the right thing to do. Canadians attach great importance to human rights for all, and they rightly expect that goods that are exported will not be used to violate human rights. I want this to be very clear. I want us, from now on, to meet a higher standard when it comes to exporting controlled goods from Canada.
It will mean changes in how Canada regulates the selling of weapons. This is the right thing to do. Canadians fundamentally care about human rights for all, and Canadians rightly expect that exports are not used to violate human rights. Let me be clear. From this day forward, I want us to hold ourselves to a higher standard on the export of controlled goods from Canada. I would also like to provide further clarity on one point. As a matter of broad principle, Canada will honour, to the greatest extent possible, pre-existing contracts. We can all understand and appreciate the fundamental importance of being able to trust Canada. We also understand the inherent importance of providing stability and certainty. Canada is a trusted partner around the world, and people must continue to be sure of the high worth of our word and our commitments. The world needs to know that an agreement with Canada endures beyond elections. And this is important not only for our international partners, but also for Canadian companies and Canadian workers who need to know that they will be able to follow through on plans into which they invest their time and resources. These two amendments will also provide clarity to industry by laying out the government's and Canadians' expectations for our export control process. We will work with Canadian industry to continue to provide it with appropriate guidance. Mr. Chair, let me now turn for one moment to trade. When it comes to NAFTA, we continue to work hard on the bread and butter trade issues at the negotiating table. Our goal is greater competitiveness investment certainty, and growth in North America. At the most recent round of talks in Montreal, we put forward some creative ideas with a view to establishing a constructive dialogue on certain key issues, including the rules of origin, investment dispute settlement, and ongoing modernization of the agreement. Serious challenges do remain, particularly with regard to the United States' unconventional proposals. As the Prime Minister said yesterday in Chicago, our objective is a good deal, not just any deal. At the negotiating table, Canada always takes a facts-based approach. We are always polite, and we are adept at seeking creative solutions and win-win-win compromises. But we are also resolute. Canada will only accept an agreement that is in our national interest and respects Canadian values. Finally, Mr. Chair, let me conclude with a few words about one of Canada's signature priorities for this year, our G7 presidency. This is a great opportunity for us to speak with a strong voice on the international stage. Au cours de sa présidence du G7 en
While we preside over the G7 in 2018, Canada will mobilize our counterparts around world issues requiring our attention, the investment in economic growth to help all, to prepare for the jobs of the future, to work together to deal with climate change, oceans, and clean energy, and to build a more peaceful and safe world. In particular, we will be promoting gender equality and the empowerment of women, and will use a gender analysis for every aspect of our presidency. I will conclude, Mr. Chairman, by saying that within the G7 and the international community, Canada will continue to defend an international order based on rules, a rules-based order, and look for ways to strengthen it. And every time we have the opportunity, we will do this explicitly taking into account the bond between peace and prosperity and open trade and human rights. Thank you.
Freeland. Now, colleagues, as usual, let's go right into the rounds. As you know, your chair doesn't get involved too often, but I might have a chance to ask a question today at some point. But I'm going to start with Mr. Janis, please. Garnet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Minister Freeland, I think you know, and I want to emphasize again, that the official opposition is committed to working with the government in areas of national interest, and in particular on NAFTA. We all want to see a good deal for Canada, and we want to cooperate as much as possible to ensure the success of that. I do want to share with you just a couple points of frustration. This committee did pass a motion inviting you to come here a year ago to talk about your mandate, and our shadow minister had requested a briefing on NAFTA. It took 4 months for him to get a briefing in terms of the government's strategy and approach with respect to NAFTA. And I know that your appearance here was only scheduled after our shadow minister had already notified the embassy in Washington that he had to be away. These are a few elements of honest frustration, because we are eager to work with the government on areas of national interest. But I do want to ask you with respect to NAFTA, you didn't speak a lot about the progressive elements of it, and I think Canadians are eager to understand what exactly the government is seeking in terms of these progressive elements. So I wonder if you could share with us whether the government is seeking binding provisions with respect to things like gender and Indigenous rights, or if the government is seeking symbolic language similar to what we have in, say, the Canada-Chile FTA.
Well, thank you very much for that question, Garnet, if I may, and you're welcome to call me Frestia if you'd like. We can be a little more informal here than in the House. And let me first clarify the matter of timing of my appearance today, and I apologize for not having brought that up at the beginning. I'd like to thank everyone for being willing to meet today rather than last Thursday. I am aware that this appearance was scheduled for last Thursday. As I think people know, we had a last-minute decision to hold a meeting of the North American foreign ministers in Mexico City on the Friday. This was a meeting that we had long sought to schedule. It seemed to me, given developments in the world and in North America, that there was great value in the 3 foreign ministers of the North American countries coming together. And when quite quickly it became apparent that the end of last week was a time that would accommodate Rex and Luis, the U.S. Secretary of State and the Mexican Secretary of State, it seemed to me that the right thing to do was to go ahead with that meeting. So I apologize to everyone for everyone having to change their schedules. I'm sorry some people couldn't be here, but it was truly about my being able to get to Mexico City for that meeting. On the NAFTA negotiations, I do also want, Garnet, to thank you, to thank opposition parties, and really to thank all Canadians for the Team Canada approach we have brought to these negotiations. As you all know, we have both NDP and Conservative members, business, Labour, Indigenous representation on my NAFTA Council, and I think that Team Canada approach is serving us extremely well, and I really want to thank everybody, especially opposition colleagues, for that approach. When it comes to the progressive elements that we have put forward, in my view, our core progressive ideas are in the Labour, environmental, gender, and Indigenous chapters. And each of those chapters is different and speaks to a different need and a different part of the agreement. The Indigenous chapter is certainly the first time Canada has put forward an Indigenous chapter in a trade agreement.
Minister, just with respect, just in terms of time, because I've got some other matters I want to get to.
But you know what? I'd like you asked me a question about the progressive elements, and I'd like to answer
I just
them.
want to nail down whether they're symbolic or binding.
Garnet, I'm answering. I am.
Cut the minister off, Garnet. I told you I'll give you plenty of time, so relax. Just stay chilled. It'll be all good. Minister?
We believed that the Indigenous chapter was it's certainly the first time Canada has put forward an Indigenous chapter. We had thought it was the first time an Indigenous chapter was put forward in a trade agreement, but I was talking about this with New Zealand, and they said that they think that there appears to be one between New Zealand and Taiwan because of some ethnic relations between their Indigenous peoples. But it is really novel ground, it is new ground for Canada, and I'm very proud that we're putting that forward. When it comes to the labour and environmental chapters, it is our belief, and labour organizations agree with us, that the labour proposal we have put forward is the strongest labour proposal, the most progressive labour proposal Canada has ever advanced in a trade negotiation. This is a set of proposals that would bite, and that would do the important work. I spoke in my comments about our support for globalization at the same time that we appreciate that globalization has left some people behind. It's not fair for Canadian workers to be exposed to a race to the bottom facing other countries where labour and environmental standards are lower. Our labour chapter and our environmental chapter are very much designed and have the intent of protecting our workers against that. And when it comes to the gender chapter, I'm glad that you referred to the chapter that we have in our agreement with Chile. That really is groundbreaking, and this chapter very much builds on that work. Our proposals do, in any case. None of these are closed chapters, so it's important to talk about the Canadian proposals here.
Thank you, Minister. So what I wanted to understand is whether or not you are seeking binding language on gender and Indigenous rights. I guess those who are watching will judge whether or not you answered the question, but I do want to make sure we get some other elements in the time that we have. Minister, on the issue of China, Canada's ambassador to China said recently, in some important areas such as the environment, global warming, free trade, globalization, the policies of the Government of Canada are closer to the policies of the Government of China than they are to U.S. policies. You didn't address China in your opening remarks. I'd just be curious to know, and it can be a quick response if you're comfortable with that. Do you agree with these remarks of the ambassador? Do they reflect the position of the Government of Canada?
You know, Garnet, the reality is that China is today the world's second largest economy. It's a country with which we already have a very significant trading relationship, and with which many countries in the world have a significant trading relationship. The existence and the importance of China is a fact. And, certainly as someone who cares very deeply about issues like our canola trade, I am very aware of the significance of our China relationship for Canada. It is the duty of any Canadian government to have a strong and meaningful relationship with the world's second largest economy, and that is something our country is working hard to build. Having said that, it is also the case, and this is something which we express very clearly in our meetings with Chinese officials, that in many ways and in many areas, Canadian values, the Canadian political system, differs very strongly from the political system of China. That is a reality as well, and that is something that we all should be very clear about.
Minister, my question, though, was okay. Well, I'll just say first off that my question was whether or not you agreed with the statements of Mr. McCallum, and I certainly agree that we need to have a relationship with China. I guess because this is my last question, I do want to table, for the benefit of the committee, this is a photograph of the Golden Lampstand Church. There's a church in China that over 50,000 people attended, so I'll table that with the committee. I also want to table a photograph of the church being blown up, and this was in the same month where Canada's ambassador to China, John McCallum, said we have more in common in terms of our values with China than we do with the United States. Minister, I agree that we need to trade with China. Certainly the previous government increased trade with China. But I'd like to know then, on the particular case of the destruction of the church, I mean, if that happened anywhere else in the world, I don't doubt that members of the government, the minister would have had strong statements about that. If the minister had anything to say about the destruction of this church, if the government had anything to say about it, and how she feels about the comments of Canada's ambassador saying we have more in common with China than the United States in light of that terrible act of what some might call terrorism happening in the same month.
Well, I think I've been very clear on the question of the Canadian political system and Canadian political values vis-a-vis those of other countries. And let me say one thing very clearly for all Canadians. I really think, particularly at this moment in the history of the world, something that Canada is particularly poised to do and that Canadians really believe in is to speak up for persecuted ethnic and religious minorities around the world. That's something that I'm personally very committed to do, and I believe that we have strong cross-party support for doing that.
Thank you, Minister. We're going to go to Mr. Sani, please.
Thank you very much for being here today, Minister. I just want to maybe start off with your last comment. As you know, our government has been at the forefront of calling for the protection of the Rohingya and an end to their persecution, going so far as to appoint a special envoy, Bob Ray, to advise the government on this matter. You, on many occasions, have also said that this is a case of ethnic cleansing, and the perpetrators responsible must be brought to justice. Can you update the committee and Canada of what Canada's doing to help the Rohingya people?
Thank you very much for that question, Raj. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the issue of the persecution of the Rohingya is one, I think, of particular concern for this government and for Canadians. And I have been really proud of the cross-party support for the Government of Canada focusing on that issue. As I said in my remarks, I think in the world today, there is particular significance and particular importance for us as a non-majority Muslim country to be focused on really pay attention to the oppression of this Muslim minority, one of the most persecuted groups in the world. I said in my remarks that words matter, and I do think it's important for us to be clear that what is happening to the Rohingya is ethnic cleansing. These are crimes against humanity which are happening today, which have been happening. And I think that it's really important also that the people committing these atrocities understand that personal accountability will happen. That is something the international community is pushing for. That is something Canada stands behind very, very strongly. You mentioned the Prime Minister's Special Envoy, Bob Rae. Bob's appointment to look into this issue, to travel to Myanmar, to travel to Rakhine State, is a very important part of our commitment to being engaged, to speaking up for the Rohingya. And I would just like to say in conclusion that I have been really proud of the commitment of our Parliament broadly, of all the parties in Parliament to these persecuted people, but even more proud of the commitment of Canadians. I think all of us knew that there was a real desire among Canadians for the Government of Canada to match donations to support the Rohingya, and Canadians responded to that magnificently. We're a great country, and I think we're never greater than we're speaking up for some of the world's most persecuted people.
Thank you for that. The other question I had was, this is something important to me because I've been in touch with people who have been involved in the landmine community, even prior to entering politics, and I was very happy to know that the government has now is providing $12 million of new funding for the elimination of landmines around the world. And since we signed the Ottawa Treaty 20 years ago, we've always been a leader in IED eradication. And so I'm just wondering if you could update us as to where the money is going to go and how it's going to be allocated.
Thank you also for that question. I think that all of us can be proud of the Ottawa Treaty. We celebrated together its 20th anniversary last year. That was a great Canadian international accomplishment and has really made significant difference in the world. When you think about the devastation caused by landmines, anything we can do to have fewer of them be used means that there are fewer mutilated people, fewer dead people in the world. And that is why we were really proud on December 4th to announce an additional $12 million to pursue our goal of ridding the world of anti-personnel landmines. Men and boys are the group disproportionately who are the direct victims of landmines, but it tends to fall to women and girls to care for them. So we are applying our gender-based analysis to dealing with the impact of landmines. In terms of where the funding is going to go, we are focusing on Syria, on Ukraine. As members of the committee know, among its many afflictions, the Donbass is afflicted with landmines. Colombia, Cambodia, and the Lao People's Democratic Republic. And in this project, we're working with trusted international partners. But, the landmine issue is really something I see Anita nodding because she's worked around the world so much. It really is an issue where the international community recognizes Canadian leadership. And I think we should all be proud to build on that 20-year legacy. I certainly am.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will go to Madame Lavidière, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, and thank you for being here, Minister. If I may, I will go fairly quickly because I have 12 questions I'd like to ask. I know I can't get through them all, but I would like to go quickly, and I don't want to be impolite. With respect to the helicopters that might be sold to the Philippines, you said today that they cannot be exported, but you said that this kind of goods and export doesn't require a permit. If I may, I would like to thank you personally for your work at the outset on this issue of export of controlled goods, and we have certainly listened carefully to what you've had to say, and we have been able to use the amendments that you spoke of. So thank you for your great contribution in this area. Now, with respect to the Philippines, my responsibility is for export permits. As I said yesterday and again today, We have received no request for such a permit. But as I said today and yesterday, human rights are very important. And if there is a request for an export permit, we are perfectly prepared to carry out a rigorous analysis, and a permit will be issued only after a rigorous assessment. With respect to the ICC's activities and the Philippines, I know you're concerned about this, and this is an important step. Thank you, Minister. But the problem is that you will not receive an export permit request because under the current system, these are agreements that are negotiated through the CCC. And so this shows that there are important loopholes in our system. Now, I want to go to the arms control agreements, but we know that in 2012 that there was an MOU that allowed for helicopters to be exported. So I want to know by whom and how this was done. As I have already said, I can talk about my responsibilities. As Minister of Foreign Affairs, my responsibility is to sign or not sign export permits. We have not received any request for such a permit. But I am very clear, and everyone should understand, that if we do receive a request for a permit to export helicopters to the Philippines, then because human rights are very important for Canada, now we have spoken to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister have spoken to the Philippines about this. You will not receive such a request. There isn't such a mechanism, and so your answer to me seems to be that things will just continue as they always have. Therefore, I assume that this was a sale that was signed by the government, your government, the Liberal government. Now, concerning the Saudi agreement,
Sir, with all due respect, the standard and current Canadian regulations don't say we will not export if there is conclusive evidence. It says that we shouldn't export if there's a reasonable risk. And given the fact that the ambassador from Saudi Arabia himself told the Globe and Mail that yes, Canadian labs were used in eastern Saudi Arabia, et que les organismes de la société civile, des experts vraiment.
Now, independent experts and others have confirmed that those labs were involved in attacks against civilians. So I think that there is a risk that might not be an assumed risk, but it is real. You should not export if there is a reasonable risk.
And intentionally so in my language. What I said was when the media reports appeared, I instructed the department and our objective and independent public service, of which, and you were once a member, a distinguished member, to do a thorough analysis. The report which I received from our public service was that there was no conclusive evidence of the use of Canadian weapons in the commission of human rights violations. That is the advice which I received as minister. We believe in a fact-based approach. and we believe in relying on the counsel of our public service. Having said that, as I said in my remarks, the issue raised some concerns for me, and that is why, as I have announced today, I think now is the time on a going forward basis for Canada to move to a more rigorous system of control over arms exports.
Merci, Madame la Ministre.
Thank you, Minister. Would it be possible to have a copy of that report? I would have to ask the department. I'll have to speak with the officials.
Pour continuer,
To continue, I have one last question on arms exports. Bill C-47, the implementation of the arms trade treaty. I hope that there will be criteria in the bill. I see that is the case, and that is a good change, but all of the experts we've heard from indicated that this does not meet either the spirit or the wording of the arms trade treaty. The bill does not at all address the role of the Canada Commercial Corporation and others, and in the case of the helicopters for the Philippines, we know that CCC and EDC are important players. President Trump has announced that he would relax the arms export rules for exports to certain countries that have dubious human rights records. We know that Canadian parts have moved through the United States to Nigeria, for example. There are other issues with the bill, the role of the Canadian Commercial Corporation, and the role of the United States with respect to our exports. There are a lot of issues that I agree with you on, but not entirely with this one. The additions and changes that I announced today are a great improvement. I believe also that the fact that our government has decided to join this treaty is a very important step for Canada. And this is a substantial improvement in our regulations concerning exports. Now, concerning our ties with the United States in the area of military activities, we know that the United States and Canada are important strategic allies. And our relationship is very important both for Canada and for the United States. We are allies. We share a border, and we are allies in NATO. I have to wind up, Bob, saying thank you, Minister, and thank you, Ms. Laverdiere.
Mr. Chair, Minister, thank you for taking the time out, coming in front of the committee. My question is going to be on Bill for C-47. During this committee's study of Bill C-47, we have heard concerns raised by Canadian Shooting Sports Association and Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters. Myself, coming from a rural riding in British Columbia, I get to hear those concerns at the same time. Would this Bill C-47 will have any impact on domestic firearms? It's a twofold question. And the next one is, Does it impose any record-keeping requirements that we don't already exist?
Thank you very much, Jadi, for that question. As you know, I currently represent a very urban riding, but I was born and raised in a very rural one. So I understand that question, and I think it is a very important one. And I'm delighted to have this opportunity to offer some clarity on that issue. So Bill C-47 will make changes to the process for importing and exporting controlled goods to and from Canada. It does not affect domestic gun control regulation, and it does not affect the domestic trade in arms. The Firearms Act falls under public safety, so admirably and effectively managed by our friend, Minister Goodale. This is not the purview of Global Affairs Canada. We have quite enough on our plate without that. C-47 does not create any form of new registry for gun ownership. Let me be very clear on that. Record-keeping obligations in the Export and Import Permit Act have existed since 1947, and Bill C-47 does not change the system that Canadians already know. And let me quote from the Arms Trade Treaty Preamble, which acknowledges, and I quote, "The legitimate trade and lawful ownership and use of certain conventional arms for recreation, cultural, historical, and sporting activities where such trade, ownership, and use are permitted or protected by law." I know that there have been some concerns about that issue, and I am very pleased to have the opportunity to absolutely put those concerns to rest. So for that question.
Thank you very much.
Be on the record about that.
Secondly, you hosted a very important meeting in Vancouver, that is, with the Secretary of State from USA and other foreign ministers about increasingly volatile behavior by North Korea. As Canada looks to commit itself to Asia-Pacific region, could you please speak to the importance of Canada's diplomatic engagement in North Korea and Canada's role in creating peaceful and secure Korean Peninsula?
Thank you also for that question, Jadi. We were very pleased just a few weeks ago to co-host with the United States the Summit on Peace and Security on the Korean Peninsula. This is one of the most pressing issues in the world today. North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile tests are a breach of international law, and they pose a dangerous security threat for the entire world. Our summit meeting in Vancouver was an opportunity to show international solidarity and international resolve around that important issue. It was a very important opportunity for us, the assembled foreign ministers, to assert together that a diplomatic solution is both possible and essential to this crisis. We were very pleased to host the meeting in Vancouver for a number of reasons, not least among them that Canada is the proud home to one of the largest Korean diaspora communities anywhere in the world. And as MP for University Rosedale, Toronto's Koreatown is in my riding. We do have a special interest and responsibility. We are, as our BC colleagues know, we are a Pacific nation. And so we are particularly engaged in this issue. And one additional important purpose and value of that meeting was to show, to show our support for our partners, South Korea. Minister Kang, South Korea's foreign minister, is an excellent, extremely effective foreign minister. And while we in Canada certainly are concerned about what is happening in North Korea. We're concerned because of the threat to the world. Of all the countries in the world, South Korea is most directly exposed. And I think it's very important for us to be showing solidarity and support for South Korea. And that was a very good opportunity to do that. So we were very glad to host the meeting. I'd like to thank our colleagues from Global Affairs. They did a fantastic job pulling it together at what, by the standards of these sorts of summits, is very short notice. And this is going to be an issue in which Canada will continue to be very, very urgently engaged. And then just finally, the timing of the meeting turned out to be very fortuitous because it happened just as North and South Korea were able to engage in talking about and working together on the Olympics. And all the participants in the meeting were able to speak about, the value of that engagement as admittedly a very small step, but a positive step.
Thank you.
Thank you. And go Canada, go for our athletes at the Olympics.
Thank you, Mr. Sadu. We're going to go to Ms. Van den Velde, please. Anita?
Yes, thank you very much. Before I begin, Minister, I just want to thank you for the respect that you have shown this committee and the witnesses before this committee in your openness and willingness to see amendments that are going to improve Bill C-47 and strengthen our export control mechanisms. So appreciation for that. J'aimerais d'abord vous remercier d'être parmi nous aujourd'hui.
I would first like to thank you for being here today and congratulate you on your commitment as Minister of Foreign Affairs, and in particular for your commitment to help women and with respect to peace and security. As you know, the UN passed Resolution 1325 to strengthen peace processes at all levels. And we know that peace agreements are stronger, last longer when women are involved. Canada has a great deal of expertise and has much to offer in this area. Women can participate in peace operations around the world. Canada's approach includes the promotion of women in peace and security at all levels, whether we are talking about UN missions, foreign affairs, police operations. And if that is the case, the chances of long-term peace are improved. What do you think will be the strongest contributors to these activities? Thank you, Anita.
I do think that the work that we have all been doing together on C-47 is a real example, and Mr. Chair, let me address you also, of how a parliamentary committee can do really important work in improving legislation. As I said, I think this is not the first time that this committee has had a real impact on the work of the government. The Magnitsky report is another real example of a way that this committee's work has shaped our government policy. That's the way parliamentary democracy is supposed to work. And I would really like to thank the committee for being so effective and thank all the witnesses who come before the committee. It's made a real difference to what we're doing as a country. En ce qui concerne,
with respect now to the subject that is close to your heart and mind, women, peace and security, I agree absolutely with what you said. And Anita, I want to congratulate you on your work, not just here, but in Kosovo, Vietnam, Bangladesh, in the Congo. And I think that these life experiences certainly inspire your work as a parliamentarian, as a member of this committee. It's very important for me, and I believe it is a great contribution to Canada that you are making, and we are fortunate. I agree with what you said. For women, for our government, including women in operations to promote peace and security, is a priority. We spoke of this at our peace and peace building summit in Vancouver, and I am absolutely convinced that we need to and will include more women in peace operations, and this will make a great difference for Canada, for the world, for the United Nations. It is a huge task. It is not easy to do, but it is important. We now have a plan, and we have support from many countries around the world. I know that it is needed, and I believe that it is possible to do this.
We know that when women are involved in decision-making processes and in institutions generally, whether it's national parliaments, whether it's being part of trade negotiations, peace negotiations, that we see an improvement. We see the Sustainable Development Goals being reached sooner. And if women are part of the process, participants in the process, then we actually do see that peace agreements last longer. And yet today only 4% of the signatories on peace agreements are women. So I'm very, very pleased to see that we have a new policy that is going to be encouraging more women to be involved in peace agreements around the world. But if you could elaborate on the fact that when we talk about a feminist foreign policy or feminist international development policy, we're not just talking about things that put women into existing frameworks and existing processes, but in fact improving those processes, making them more inclusive, and including women in every single part of that process. So if you could explain a little bit how that would work in practice in terms of the plan that Canada is putting forward and the leadership that we're making around the world, and particularly on the women, peace and security file.
We'll have to be short because we're going to, time is up for this member.
Okay,
Please.
well, let me, in that case, just say we need to do precisely what you suggest in your question. I very much agree, and I actually think at this point we have a pretty broad national consensus around the fact, which is now proven by really quite a rich historical experience and empirical studies, that when we include women in peace and security processes, when we have women engaged in peacekeeping, when we have women engaged in policing, we have better outcomes. I think it's the right thing to do because it's fair and it's in line with our values, but it also leads to better results, and that is why Canada is so proud to be championing this.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. We're going to go to Mr. Barlow, please, John.
Very much, Mr. Chair, and pleasure to be joining the committee today, and thank you for the Minister for being here. And I was honored to join our leader, Andrew Scheer, in Washington last month as part of the NAFTA team that went down there. And again, we had very positive response. It was a Team Canada approach. We know how important NAFTA is to our economy, and certainly as the Shadow Minister for Agriculture, how important it is to our agriculture file. But in saying that, I wanted to talk briefly about the CPTPP. I know that's not in your file, Minister, but I know you worked very hard on that initially when, thankfully we left it for you to carry on, and I appreciate that you were able to get the CPTPP signed. But certainly, and it's good that I know we're in good hands with Mr. Verul and Ms. Hillman now with NAFTA. But there is a grave concern, I don't want to say grave concern, but a lot of concern within our stakeholder group, especially in agriculture, that we will not sign the agreement in Chile in March, and we won't get the legislation done to be amongst those first six countries who are going to be there, that we'll miss out on some real opportunities if New Zealand, Australia are able to access that market with Japan, for example, before we are. So for us, we want to see the CPTPP signed and be a signatory as quickly as possible. What is your view in terms of being at the cabinet table? Will we be signing that agreement on March 8th in Chile? And when can we expect implementing legislation to be tabled in the House so to get that implemented as soon as possible? We can do that simultaneously. There's precedence there. We did it with CETA. We did it with Canada, Korea. Can you give us some confirmation that we'll be signing that on March 8th, and when will the implementation bill be put before the House?
I worry, John, you're trying to get me in trouble with Francois Philippe, my friend, who is my benchmate in the House of Commons. We all have to try to stay in our own lanes. But let me say on behalf of the government, as the Prime Minister has announced, we were very pleased to be able to reach an agreement in principle on the CPTPP. Canada is absolutely committed to this deal, and we are very pleased, particularly with the changes that we were able to achieve in the final months of negotiation. I think the additional protections on the cultural exemption are very valuable for Canada. I'm very pleased with the changes on the IP front, and we have some additional opportunities for Canadian autos that I think make this a better deal. Our government is enthusiastic about it and committed to it, and I'll leave the details to Francois Philippe, but you know, you have that assurance from me, and we are very mindful. Speaking on the agriculture file, no one, I think, knows it better than Steve Verheuel. We're very mindful of the additional opportunities, particularly in the Japanese market. This is great news, in particular for Canadian ranchers. And I'll let you guys finish your little thing. No, that's okay.
Minister, go ahead.
You know, we're very mindful of the opportunities for Canadian agriculture, in particular, I would say Canadian ranchers. And we're also mindful that first mover advantage is very valuable. I think we saw that with the Korea trade deal. And the fact that Canada fell behind really meant that our ranchers and our pork producers were at a disadvantage, which they're still fighting to make up. There are some great opportunities there, and I look forward to seeing Canadian farmers and ranchers take advantage of them.
Oh, thank you, Minister. And on the supply management side, we have 3.25% access as part of the CPTPP, but there are some concerns of what that's going to mean to NAFTA. Because when the TPP was originally negotiated, the Americans were part of that agreement. The Americans are no longer part of that agreement. Can you give us some assurance on NAFTA that there won't be additional access to supply? We want CPTPP to sign as quickly as possible. We know how important NAFTA is, but are there some assurances that there won't be additional access to supply management in Canada as part of the NAFTA deal?
You know, you are rightly familiar with the dairy access that is granted under CPTPP, because that, of course, was negotiated by the previous Conservative government. Steve and I and our negotiating team work very, very closely with our stakeholders, very much including the supply managed sector when it comes to the NAFTA negotiation. And we are very aware of the concerns and the very legitimate needs of our supply managed sector. When it comes to the NAFTA negotiation, as I said in my opening remarks, we are making good progress on what I would describe as the modernization chapters. Areas like cutting red tape, like electronic forms at the border, like our small and medium-sized business chapter, which we have closed. We've closed that chapter, the competition chapter, and the anti-corruption chapter. So we're making really good progress there. And as you will know from working with business people, those are really important chapters. We actually found in our
supply management.
Hang on, I'm going to get there, okay? But I want to give you the context. In our consultations ahead of the NAFTA negotiation, we found, ahead of beginning the negotiation, we found that 40% of Canadian exporters do not use their NAFTA preferences. That's a really big number, and what that tells us is both that the red tape involved in claiming those preferences is very high, and probably that the delta between the NAFTA preferences and WTO rates is smaller than it was when NAFTA was first negotiated. So we're focusing a lot on those modernization areas, and we're making good progress there. We're making meaningful progress there. Having said that, there are other differences where there are other areas where significant differences remain, and the sector you've alluded to is one of them.
Mr. Bartle, that uses up all our time and then some. So I want to, on behalf of the committee, thank Mr. Freeland for coming. Very much appreciated. Looking forward to seeing you again very soon. Colleagues, we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll get into our second hour of witnesses here at Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much. I want to bring this meeting back to order. And pursuant to Standing Order 1082, we have a study of the provision of assistance to Canadians in difficulty abroad, better known as Consular Affairs. And before us today is Mr. Gar Party, who's a former Canadian diplomat and a well-known writer on this particular subject. So, Mr. Party, thank you very much, and our apologies for starting a little late. Generally happens when we have ministers at committee. But I want to assure you that if we don't get through your presentation and questions by members today, with your permission, we'll invite you back and can finish off the job that we may not be able to do today. So with that, I want to turn the floor over to Mr. Party for his opening comments, and then colleagues, we'll get right into questions as it relates to the role of Consular Affairs and the importance of it. This is, of course, as you know, I think our second hour of this analysis, so it's a very important part of our work. So the floor is yours, Mr. Party, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I commend the committee for undertaking this examination of the provisions of assistance by the government to Canadians. It is the first time, certainly in my memory, and I think my memory is probably longer than most of you, that such an examination has ever taken place, a comprehensive examination of consular affairs. It is also a matter of added importance in the given the changes, the composition of Canadian society increasingly include persons who were born outside of Canada, and every few years we get another indication of that from Statistics Canada. Equally, an increasing number of Canadians include foreign travel as an important element in their daily lives. And I've been retired long enough now that I don't know many members here, but certainly when I was still before retirement, it was a rare day that I did not receive an inquiry from members or your staff about constituents that had run into trouble when they were outside of Canada. And most of the problems, fortunately, were easily resolved, but there is always a small number of such matters that were deeply tragic in their outcomes or were matters that went on for months and years. And many of these cases, of course, if one were to list a group of names here, I think would bring back memories just about all of you. And some of the persons, of course, that have been in such difficulty are such persons as Alison Nazaire, Christian Lamont, and William Spencer, Ingayan Taihip, who died, who was executed tragically by the government of Vietnam a number of years ago, Zara Kassimi, which still lingers on in our court system, Bill Sampson and Mahir Harar and Omar Khader and Ahmad Abu Ilmati and Abdullah Al-Malki, Muradin Nuruddin and James Lonely and Harmet Sodan, Syed Mohammed, Melissa Fung, Abdul Razak, Amanda Lindhout, Robert Fowler, Louis Gay, John Redsel and Robert Hall and Joshua Boyle most recently. And beyond the individuals that have been that linger on in our memories about these things, of course, every year we see large events that take place around the world that directly affect the Canadians who are in those countries. And these have almost become annual events, I think, in our documentation. And of course, it's always important that we remember what happened on late June in 1985, when hundreds of Canadians were killed at the hands of other Canadians when Air India was bombed off the coast of Ireland. And as you go about your work in this area, I would leave you with three factors firmly in mind that I think hopefully will help guide your work. The first of that is that there cannot be any expectation that the international environment will become more benign or peaceful in the coming years. And without being overly pessimistic, I think it's fair to say that it will become less so. And second, which is sort of almost counterintuitive in all of this, there can be no expectation that Canadians will travel less as a result of this increasingly inhospitable international environment. And the third thing to keep in mind is that there are no initiatives underway or interest in creating new ones that will increase international cooperation on consular matters. This despite the fact that nearly 2 billion people travel each year internationally, and the travel industry internationally is valued in the trillions of dollars. But I would suggest to you that there are a number of initiatives that the Government of Canada could and should take in order to improve the lot of Canadians who encounter difficulty while outside of Canada. The first such initiative is to create a legal basis establishing the responsibility of the Government of Canada to provide consular services to all Canadians. And I would emphasize the word all. Since the creation of consular services in the aftermath of the Second World War, the provision of such services is discretionary and on the part of the government, and it is considered part of the Crown prerogative, or simply put, since it's not established in Canadian law, the government of the day can decide who is to be helped or not helped. Needless to say, such discretion on the part of governments has occasionally led to discrimination with serious consequences for the Canadians involved. And some of you may be familiar with initiatives in the last Parliament where a number of private members' bills were advanced in order to change this particular aspect of consular services, but they never reached the level of law. And most recently, in 2010, the Supreme Court of Canada really reaffirmed the fact that consular Crown prerogative was still a factor in the work in this area. And I think you should bear in mind when you look at this particular aspect of consular services is the fact that Canadians pay directly for consular services. And this is the consular service fee. It was enacted in 1996, and I had a hand in its enactment back then, and well over $1 billion has been collected through that fee, which has gone into the general revenues of the government. And an examination, and there have been examinations over the years on the use of those monies paid, suggests that there is a significant discrepancy between the fees collected and the expenditures associated with consular services. This is a direct contravention of the law establishing the fee. A second area needing urgent attention is the policy associated with negotiating the release of Canadians kidnapped overseas. As matters now stand, there is an absolute prohibition, both in law and in policy, on the payment of ransoms in such situations. Last year, this policy probably contributed to the death of John Redsel and Robert Hall following their kidnapping in the southern Philippines in 2016. There is much ambiguity on the value of this approach in such kidnappings, and these are discussed in a paper that the Rideau Institute will release next week. It's a paper that I wrote in the last few weeks, and it's called Political Violence and Kidnapped Canadians. And that paper gives considerable detail on the issues involved here, and I would hope that the committee will find the time to look at it as you discuss this subject. And associated with the issue of Canadian policy on the payment of ransom in kidnapping cases is the role of the RCMP. It is evident in some of the recent kidnapping cases the RCMP has played a large role. There has been no public examination of this role, and its value to the successful conclusion of such cases is ambiguous at best. It would be appropriate for the committee to examine this role and establish its value and/or its dangers. Finally, I would emphasize the need for the establishment of an independent mechanism that would adjudicate disputes on consular services between Canadians and the government. There are a number of mechanisms active in mediating disputes between Canadians and the government, and they have been successful in dealing with a variety of disputes. There is no mechanism available to mediate or adjudicate disputes concerning consular services. At this time, consular disputes are without mediation or adjudication except for action within the judicial system. And you are all familiar with the decisions of the courts in the last few years in terms of their granting of monies to people who have taken the government to court. And we're talking tens of millions of dollars, and there is still a case before one court right now that in effect will outdistance probably the award will outdistance some of the previous ones that we've heard about. And I think that putting in place a mechanism that will help deal with these sorts of problems before they end up in the court, I think would be useful for everyone. 2 years ago, I wrote a paper. It's called Canadians Abroad, a Policy and Legislative Agenda. Again, it was released by the Rideau Centre, and that paper details a number of consular issues that require attention, and I give it to your attention, and I would hope that it would help form you in your discussions on this subject. Equally, I've written extensively in the media, as the Chairman mentioned in his introduction, on these matters, and the committee members may find the articles useful in your discussions. These articles were published in my book afterwards from a Foreign Service Odyssey, and I'll leave a copy of it with your clerk in terms of that you can distribute and you can see for yourself. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Party. I want to go straight to questions and start with Mr. Jennings, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Party, for your presence here and your testimony. Can I ask, first of all, if you could dig a little deeper on this issue of the paying of ransoms? There's a certain sort of utilitarian logic, I guess, to the don't pay ransoms position. But I think, yeah, there'd be some Canadians that would be uncomfortable with the potential coldness of that logic. Could you maybe just share with us what the alternative looks like in more kind of robust terms of, if we're sort of have an openness to that, what are the pros and cons and what are the implications?
The full answer is in this paper for next week, and it will be, and I'll make sure that the committee gets a copy of this particular paper. But essentially, it's an issue that is, in terms of the non-payment of ransoms, and I think when I was working in the Foreign Service, I dealt with well over 100 such cases, and we never lost a Canadian during the whole period. And it's a question here that it's not so much the cases are resolved on whether a ransom is paid or not paid. It is the process by which, in effect, you enter into a set of negotiations through intermediaries in order to obtain the release of the people. Now, there is no doubt whatsoever that ransoms get paid, and ransoms are paid by governments. And for people who have studied this issue, they have come to the conclusion that ransom is not the most important factor in whether somebody lives or dies in these situations. And the University of Maryland, which maintains one of the great databases in terms of this kind of thing around the world, and people who've looked at it, and there's many books written on this subject, and I think the general conclusion out there that ransom is not the issue at all in these sorts of things. It is the process by which a government organizes itself and goes about with the objective of saving the life of one of its citizens.
Okay, so I want to make sure I understood what you said correctly. If I understood it right, what you're saying is that the possibility of a ransom really is part of a conversation, a negotiation that may in many cases not actually involve the payment of a ransom, but there's the opening associated with that conversation increases the likelihood that we can save somebody's life. Whereas, on the other hand, a complete out-of-the-gate refusal to even talk about it takes away options, reduces the likelihood of that negotiation, and increases the risk to the person that's captive. Did I understand that?
That's exactly. You've summed it up quite well.
Okay. So you spoke about these cases, I believe it was in the Philippines, and the Prime Minister took a very clear public line saying we will not pay ransoms, and lives were obviously lost in that context. So you think that had we gone about it differently, had the Prime Minister not drawn that clear public line, the outcome could have been potentially very different?
Well, any number of people have been released from the same situations, and two of the people who were kidnapped at the same time as Mr. Hall and Mr. Redsel, they were released subsequent to the murder of the two Canadians. So what I'm talking about here is the process that one goes through here. And the key element in the process, and most governments, I think, have followed that particular rule, not only previous Canadian governments, but governments around the world, is that basically you do not talk about what's going on publicly. That's the last thing you can do, and that creates more danger than anything else. The idea that you're going to say something, say, in Ottawa, and it's not heard instantaneously by the kidnapping is something that we should never, in effect, assume.
Mm-hmm. So the advice you would have given, presumably to the Prime Minister, were you still there, would have been not to speak publicly about this. Would you presume that the existing public servants would have given the same advice, not to speak publicly about this?
I would hope so, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's important. On the issue of the consular services fee, I think this would be interesting to Canadians is that they pay a fee for a service and yet that fee exceeds what is the cost of providing that service. The logical conclusion would be either if there's gaps in the service to address those, or if not, to reduce the fee. And if you can maybe just clarify, I got the impression from what you said that there's a sort of a basic legal issue with the government that's supposed to collect this fee for a particular purpose and not doing that. Has there been any legal action? Do you know of any groups that have contemplated legal action over the collecting of a fee, which I think you said was outside of the legal parameters for it?
In 2008, the Auditor General did look at this issue and did made some comments in the report and suggested that Foreign Affairs should be more assiduous in terms of its accounting in this particular area. My own view is that without saying anything about accountants generally, but accountants in government can spend money and give a reason for it that's in accordance with the law, but in effect, when you look at it very closely, that it's not. Basically, and it's an area that there's a real problem looming in. About 3 years ago, the government decided to increase the consular or the period for a passport. A 10-year passport is now available, but they did not increase the consular service fee. So a Canadian buying a 10-year passport pays half of the consular fee that somebody who buys a 5-year passport. There's a need here to increase the fee so that it matches up the years of service that you get out of the passport. And the numbers that I have seen, and I must say I'm an outsider on all of this, all I can do is look at the documents that appear in public. There's, I think, in excess of $1.4 billion that has been collected in this area, and my own conclusion, which other people have said the same thing, only about $800 million of that number can be accounted for by consular services.
So it's almost double what it should be in terms of the taxes, fees we're collecting from Canadians that aren't actually at all going to what they're supposed to be going towards.
Yeah, because the fee is mandatory. You've got to pay the consular service fee at the same time that you make your application for a passport.
Go to Mr. Sani, please. Raj.
Mr. Party, I just want to carry on. First of all, thank you very much for being here. I want to follow up on the issue of Crown prerogatives, which you also highlighted in the paper that you referenced. In your conclusion in that report, you disavow the idea of Crown prerogatives. And usually, as you know, the Crown uses or the government uses Crown prerogatives to give it some flexibility in certain types of cases. If you were going to replace the concept of the Crown prerogative, let's say maybe in legislation, how would you draft it? How would you give the government flexibility to be able to deal with certain cases? Because as you know, two cases are not the same. So what kind of framework would you see?
Yeah, I would see the need for it not so much in how you deal with individual cases, but to guarantee that all Canadians receive consular services. That's the important element, because I think what has occurred over in recent years is that decisions are made as to whether some Canadians would get the level of consular services that were required by their condition. So it's up at that level that we're talking about here. And I can see why the government wants to retain Crown prerogative in the area of foreign policy and foreign affairs generally. But consular affairs is a slightly different animal in this area, and I think you can remove the element of Crown prerogative from consular services, but yet still see it retained in terms of foreign policy generally. And I think it's that trouble here is that consular services are confused as if they were foreign policy. They're not necessarily foreign policy. There's a separate international treaty, as you know, the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations is separate from the Vienna Convention on Political Relations. So even in the international community, there is a distinction made between the two types of foreign activities.
The other thing you mentioned is the necessity to update Article 5 of the Vienna Convention. And you've highlighted that, since 1954, Canada, the United States, New Zealand, and England meet annually. You talk about a global consular forum, which has met twice. And what I read from the paper was that you felt that it should now become internationalized, maybe through the UN, to update that kind of need because of changes in technology, changes in other way states may interact with each other. Can you give some highlights of where you think the changes may
I think
beneficial?
the key one is the obligation of another state to provide support to the country whose national is in difficulty in that country. And the most serious part of all of this, of course, are the people who are arrested and are in jail, and there is some sort of a judicial process that may be underway for them. It is in that area that I think the biggest need for change. Right now, in the Vienna Convention, it's one of the few enforcement element, or I should say one of the elements that I think is good, but it's limited in the sense that the person elected or detained has to be told by the arresting state that they can contact their consular authorities. It is in that area which leaves too much flexibility by the arresting state as to whether or not, in effect, a Canadian who is arrested, well, even in Texas or Arizona for that matter, whether they are informed of their right. Back in a few years ago, we went to the Supreme Court of the United States with an amicus brief because a Canadian was executed in Texas, and that Canadian was not advised of this fact that he could contact the Canadian authorities. So it's in that area that I see most of the changes that I think would be important to most Canadians.
How much time do I have?
Question.
Just to talk about the situation in Texas, and if we give it a broader overview, when you talk about clemency or the death penalty, would it be, I think, ideal to suggest that if a citizen of any country is in another country where there is the death penalty, that maybe that citizen should be recused if it's not a citizen of that state? Would that be easier?
Yes. Could you just, I missed a couple of words there.
You talked about clemency for the death penalty, no matter where any Canadian is. Just to take that to an international level, would you suggest that maybe one of the things internationally that should be looked at is that if a citizen is caught in another state where there is a death penalty, that maybe that citizen should be, or that person should be recused from the death penalty of that state?
I think that would be asking the international system for a large give. Going back 10, 15 years, there was an international movement basically to do away with the death penalty in any number of countries. But in the last 10 to 15 years, more countries have joined or added the death penalty as an element in their judicial system. So what I would, and I think this was the issue that came up during the previous government, it set out a series of conditions under which it would seek clemency for Canadians in certain situations. And it came up with regards to a case down in Montana. The new government, I think, has changed that now and has reverted to the previous policy, is that the Canadian government will support any Canadian who is sentenced to death in a foreign jurisdiction by any number of things. And most countries basically are receptive to those kinds of bilateral approaches. I'm just a little skeptical about whether you could get something at the larger level in this area. Given the role of Canada as far as the death penalty is concerned, I think we made it almost an article of faith that we would try to protect Canadians from the death penalty regardless of what country the death penalty was imposed in.
Thank you, Mr. Sani. Madame Lavillière, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would first like to apologize for missing your presentation, but after the minister's presentation, there were a number of journalists that wanted to speak to her out in the hall, so I do apologize. I would like to know a little bit more about cooperation between the department, whether we're talking about international affairs, justice, defense, the border services, and so on. So what kind of cooperation is there when there are difficult situations like hostage takings? And how has that changed over time? I think that when there are negotiations with foreign entities, I think that the RCMP plays a different role from foreign affairs. Could you elaborate on that and tell us whether any improvements are needed?
I guess the starting point here should always be that, the consular service represents the Canadian in difficulty overseas. That's our function. That's our responsibility in government. And no one else in government has that responsibility. The RCMP or CSIS or border services, they all have their own mandate, and those mandates drive them in certain directions that could be very inimical to the kinds of things that we try to achieve. And it is in that, sometimes within government, it is that coordination that doesn't take place. And there is a need for that coordination to take place. There's cases recently we've gone through, some of them resolved at the through civil cases in the courts, where the courts agreed that the RCMP or CSIS were contributors to the detention and the imprisonment of Canadians abroad without any sort of due process. And it's in those kinds of cases that I think the great difficulty occurs. And I think the O'Connor inquiry and the Yakabuchi inquiry, both of them had a lot to say in this area. And I'm not sure whether or not, in effect, their reports have necessarily found acceptance throughout the government. And so the possibility of those kinds of cases still arriving, I think, are still there. In the area of kidnapping, which I think you alluded to as well, it is your ability to reach into another country, and more often than not, you're limited to deal with the other government, but what you're looking for is an intermediary that's going to have some validity as far as the kidnappers are concerned. Before I retired, the vast majority of kidnappings that I dealt with were in Colombia. And in Colombia, there is even a law that prevented us from sort of doing any sort of direct negotiations. But the Catholic Church in Colombia was exceptional in willing, in effect, to accept the mandate. They accepted their mandate in such cases were the same as ours, and that was to try to save the life of the individual involved. And the Catholic Church was exceptional. Also, in some of these countries, the International Committee of the Red Cross has got a bit of a mandate in this area, and they've been willing in some cases, in effect, to act. And they've been quite active, I think, as far as Syria and Iraq is concerned. So you've got to go out and find an intermediary. In the case of Mr. Fowler and Mr. Gay, who were kidnapped in West Africa, I suppose it's fair to say the local government took a very active interest in this area, and there's even been suggestions that it was the local government that actually paid the ransom ultimately for their release.
Merci.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Another issue that has been raised is something I witnessed when there were the hurricanes last fall. There were a lot of people who complained, and we still hear about that with kidnappings and so on. There were a lot of complaints that communication with families here in Canada were not adequate. Is there any way to improve that?
You've touched on what I consider to be one of the great weaknesses in our consular services, and I don't think it's by design or anything like that. It's one, the size of the country, and sometimes a telephone call just will not do it, whereas sitting down and talking face to face with somebody who's going through really a traumatic event involving some members of their families and that. And as with all things in government, of course, it's a question of money here, and this is why I tend to emphasize how the money is spent that is already paid by Canadians to get this service, and this is very important. There is no career consular service as such. In effect, we all come out of essentially other parts of the department, and you're smiling at all of this, and I'm sure that in your past you've done the same kind of work. But that ability to have people who are willing to take on this kind of work. It's not something that comes readily to political officers, and nor do they have the training or the background or even in some cases the inclination to do so. And I'm sure that you've run across these as far as the department is concerned in many of these cases. And I don't have an easy answer. Every government that I've ever spoken to around the world all say the same thing. There used to be something called the consular service. But over time, these have all disappeared, and the service itself has rolled into all of the other services. In Canada, we've had any number of structural changes with regards to who is responsible for consular services. It's been stable now, I think it's fair to say, for well over 10 years now. And so I follow the press reporting in this area. I talk to reporters assiduously. And one of the things I have noticed is that I have heard as many compliments about the work of consular affairs in this area as I've heard of complaints. And I can't say in the time that I was working there that balance ever crossed my desk. So it is, obviously people are working on this, but it is always a struggle to get the right people doing the work. And we always used to sort of say, oh God, it's Monday morning. And Monday morning, when you're doing this work, right off the top, you've had at least 10 people who died overseas. And one of your first jobs then is to contact the families. And it just, it is, anybody who does that kind of work, it is a difficult job. And that's why a lot of people don't stay there for very long, because they find the work very difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Pardy. Madame Lavière, thank you. We'll go to Madame Vanderbilt, please. Vanderbilt.
Yes. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Pardy, for your sharing your vast expertise and experience with us. I'd like to pick up on a question that Mr. Saini posed about the Crown prerogative. You mentioned that right now the Crown prerogative gives the right for discrimination, where the government can essentially pick and choose which citizens to help and which ones not to help. Can you give examples of what that would look like, the kind of things that have happened?
3 or 4 of the cases that I mentioned there, the current one, and it's still a current case, is a man by the name of Abdel Razak, who went out to Sudan to visit family there, and what I've seen and what has been reported, and I think has been detailed as far as the court case is concerned, that in effect he was detained by the Sudanese authorities at the request of the Government of Canada. That's what the case before the court hinges upon, and got to the point where the Sudanese says, well, we don't know why we've arrested this guy, and then we wouldn't do anything about, in effect, getting the man repatriated back to Canada, with the result that he ended up staying well over a year in the Canadian Embassy in Khartoum. The embassy looked after him, but yet the policy that came out of Ottawa said, we're not going to give him a passport to get him back to Canada. They used, I think, what most people would regard as a specious argument because he was on one of the lists. But the UN has said, this was a UN list, but the UN had made it very clear that somebody on the list that wanted to get back to their own country, then they were allowed to travel. But there was a great deal of difficulty in getting a ticket for this man and getting him on an aircraft so he could come back to Canada. And it took, I think, almost 5 years for this to happen. And this is at the center of a court case right now that is being, I think it's one of the Ontario courts that this one is before. I don't think it's a federal court necessarily, but we'll see.
So this is not a current case outstanding right now. This was from previous years?
Oh, yes, this started back in 2010, I think. This case has been around a long time. And the case before the courts is at least 3, if not 4 years. And I'm on the list of being an expert witness for this particular case if it actually ends up in the court.
Have there been any new ones in the past couple of years?
That's the only one that I know is current right now. But as you know, I'm not on the inside of any of these sort of things. There could be other cases there. I follow the press pretty assiduously in these areas. But, well, there is one going on that involves a man by the name of Jack Letts, who is in jail in northern Syria. He's been held by one of the Kurdish groups, and there is discussions going on as to get him to be repatriated to Canada. He also has British citizenship in addition to Canadian citizenship. The CBC is going to do an article tonight on this particular case, but there's elements of this in this particular case, although the Prime Minister has already spoken about the case and said, whatever we can do, and I think the government has been active in getting that person returned to Canada as quickly as possible. And there's no government involved on the other side. It's one of the revolutionary groups, and I think they just want to say hasta la vista.
Yeah, and I think we've heard our Prime Minister say a Canadian is a Canadian. So if you are a Canadian citizen, you deserve to be treated equally when it comes to consular services as well.
Under law, there's no ambiguity about this whatsoever. And that's what's ironic about some of these things. That's why they end up in the courts, and the courts basically agree to the large settlements that have been made in these cases because it is contrary to, well, basically the Charter. Yeah.
What about permanent residence? I know that there's no obligation, but are there services that we can provide for permanent residents?
Yeah, it depends on the issue. Permanent residents get into, they would not have Canadian citizenship, and the consular services are predicated on citizenship, essentially. But there's been any number of situations around the world where, in effect, there have been permanent residents, and you've reached in, and if the local government is willing to cooperate with you, then you try to provide whatever assistance that they would find acceptable. Back in '94 with the Rwanda we had one situation where we had nuns who were running an orphanage in Kigali, and they got all the way out to, we got them all the way out with the kids to Nairobi, and we then got them all on a plane, and they all ended in Quebec City. None of them were Canadian citizens, but you do this sort of thing for humanitarian reasons in these situations.
Yeah, and picking up on the humanitarian reasons, we all have the heartbreaking cases that we get in our constituencies, and where we have family members that are here. In my case, I know Bashir Maktal's family is here, and there are others, and we want to be able to do everything that we can. There was, in one of your papers, I believe, talk of having an ombudsperson for consular services. You didn't mention that in your opening remarks.
Yes, I did at the very end. Yeah.
What would that look like? What kind of would that help?
There's been a number of examples throughout the government. Where this kind of person, acts as an intermediary between a Canadian who feels that they've been badly treated by actions of the government and on the part of the government. And I think you need somebody in that sort of a role. As far as I know, no one has ever done this anywhere around the world. Have created this sort of. So it's a very unique thing in this area. So it's worth looking at, I think, in detail here, because I've seen. I think the other day somebody told me that there's upwards of several $100 million of cases that the Justice Department has detailed here where the government has been the possibility of being sued here for wrongful actions in the eyes of the person affected. And so it's an area that an ombudsman, an intermediary who can in effect intervene early on, mediate and adjudicate in some of these cases, I think will start removing some of these because the judicial system is not a good place to deal with these cases. I would just add to can I add just one other thing? When you listed the difficult ones, the most difficult ones to deal with, of course, and we've just had a case in the last few days, and this is parental child abductions. Those are the most difficult ones. And the law, there is a bit of international law in this area, but the international law is based on the European, North American model of the family, and many parts of the world have other laws in this area, and it makes it very difficult on those cases.
Thank you, Mr. Party. Now we're going to go to Mr. Sidhu, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Party, for your service to our country. Consular affairs are doing a good job. I want your expertise, how to make it a great job or easier for Canadians to have access to consular affairs in case of disaster, what we've seen last year with the climate change It's getting hard and hard every year. I had a personal case, actually. Somebody phoned me in the middle of the night. The mother, her daughter was going to a med school, and she wouldn't take no for an answer. She said, I'm not getting anywhere with getting in touch with the Consular Affairs. Americans are picking up people left, right, and center. Fair enough, she showed up at my doorstep. She was so panicking, 2 o'clock in the morning. How do we, going forward, I mean, there's a lot of schooling going on in the Caribbean. Can we make this a mandatory registration? Can the airlines get somebody to fill out a form before they go, how long they're going to go for? What's your suggestion on that?
Well, the mechanics of registering is, we've been doing it for years, and it's about as easy as you can probably do. But most Canadians, when they head off for the southern sun and things like that, they just don't think that a disaster is just around the corner, and more often than not, they're not prepared to do so. The other element in all of this, though, I think, is that governments are not being proactive enough in talking to the media when these times of crises occur. Quite often they will use the Privacy Act and say that we can't say things about an individual and things like that. And if you go to the site of the Privacy Commissioner, and he has got a section on that which says that that is not what the Privacy Act is meant to protect, is things in this area. But there is, and it's not only foreign affairs, all parts of government will use the Privacy Act to not talk to Canadians about things that they're doing. You're not out to expose an individual Canadians, but there's no reason why you can't provide more of an explanation, to Canadians about what's going on. And your reference to the events in the Caribbean last fall, there was, what surprised me as an outsider looking at all of this was that how many got back home in a relatively short period of time. I don't know how many of those we've done over the years. The worst one, of course, was out of Lebanon in, what was it? I forget which year. Was it 06, I guess it was, or something? And, the registration side of it, I think they looked at it and says, well, there's 3,000 Canadians in Lebanon here we've got to help. By the time it was all over, there were 40,000 Canadians in Lebanon that had to be evacuated. And every other country that have had populations out of the Middle East run into exactly the same problem. And we all arrived on, and I think somebody told me, everybody arrived on the spot charter market for boats, because it was very difficult to fly, to get in there by air. You had to use a boat to get from Lebanon up to Cyprus or somewhere else in the Middle East. And the boats were just not available even to do it. And the Israelis were running a blockade on the Lebanese coast. So the problems that you run into in these areas in terms of time, that was a special case. There was an act of war under that way, but more often than not, in the Caribbean in particular, the island, as I understand it, I have a friend who went down to the British Virgin Islands right after it, and who's quite familiar with the place. He said he did not even recognize. Everything had been wiped out on the island. And when you say wiped out, you just weren't talking about the vegetation. You were talking about every service that you would hope that would be available for you. But there is no easy answer other than I think you've got to talk to Canadians as much as you possibly can while the crisis is going on. Not after the fact when you measure, yeah, we did pretty good on that one. Canadians want the information just as quickly as CNN or CBC gives it to them in terms of that, because they are saying things that may be different than what the government is saying, or indirectly.
Thank you. We got a short question from Mr. Secand, and then we'll go to Mr. Kimiech, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How much time do I have? A minute, two? How much time do I have?
You don't have much, so go ahead and ask your question.
So like Mr. Sidhu, I had one incident where a father called and his daughter was sexually assaulted. She had just landed in Italy. Fortunately, the situation ended quite well. We were able to get in touch with Global Affairs Canada, and he was quite pleased with the result. Now, I can certainly appreciate, I would want every single Canadian to have that level of care in whichever country they go. But I can also appreciate, there are a lot of countries, and we may not be able to provide that level of care to each Canadian when they travel, but I certainly would want every Canadian to get the same care if they were within that country. So I guess I'm having difficulty understanding the gap. I understand there is discretion under the royal prerogative, but why does this have to be enshrined in law?
It is not enshrined. That's the problem. It's the Crown prerogative is not enshrined in law. It is a convention of our Constitution. But what I found surprising, and I think it's worthwhile if you want more detail here, is to go back and read the 2010 Supreme Court decision. This involved Omar Khadr, by the way, and the Khadr family, I think, has provided more progress in terms of the use of our laws than almost any other family in the history of this country. But in that particular decision, the Supreme Court said that his rights had been abused by CSIS going down and interviewing him. And at the same time, the Supreme Court said, we cannot instruct the government as to what it should do in order to assist Mr. Khadr and get him out.
Go ahead, Mr. Sakan. We're going to go a little over time here.
Question then. In your opinion, is it a privilege to travel on a Canadian passport?
It's a necessity. I don't see it as any, it doesn't carry any special protection because it's a Canadian passport. It is an international document, and if you leave Canada, well, and in many, right now, I think they've become more, it used to be you could use a Canadian Tire credit card to go into the States, but that ain't going to work anymore. So it's there as an absolute need. It's imposed by other countries, and there's no other way to do it. The passport is the international document that has to be used.
Thank you, Mr. Party. Mr. Sakan. Mr. Kimyich, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to split my time. Scarlett has one little question, so I'm going to go really quickly in mine. You did mention the Azar case, so Alison Azar, her 4 kids, Charvan, Rojavan, Dersim, and Maytan, and that's been a case been ongoing, still hasn't been resolved. So my question is specifically on dual citizenship. I'm a dual citizen. I've had a lot of these consular cases. Not specifically to people in my riding, like Davud Hanshi, who's still in Turkey. So a Canadian citizen, naturalized in Canada, who still holds citizenship in another country. They travel overseas for vacation, for business reasons, whatever that is, but the other country doesn't recognize our citizenship, so our claim over that person. How do you fix that? Like, there's no easy fix, and I'm just going to make a half proposition here. Would a potential solution be, when we naturalize citizen, is to inform the other country of the case? Now, some countries don't recognize dual citizenship. And I know in the case of, for instance, my wife, who is from Singapore, eventually 3 years ago, the Singaporean government sent her a letter and told her that she was no longer a citizen, but she needed to send back the letter to confirm it. So in those dual citizenship situations, what should or could Canada do more of to fix it?
It would be nice, when they become a Canadian citizen, is to say, look, you can't demand that they give up another citizenship unless they want to do so. The other country, by the way, that is quite rigid in this area is India. And you apply, if you're an Indian or somebody that suggests you might have lived in India and you apply, say, for an Indian passport, the Indian Embassy or High Commission here will demand that you get a certificate from the Canadian government that you're not a Canadian citizen. So things like this other governments are doing. The problem that we do have is that and I'm not kidding you, the problem in this area, in 1930, the League of Nations passed there's an international treaty that is there that Canada signed on to back then that basically says that a citizen who is in with dual nationality is in their country of second citizenship, then the other country has no right to intervene for consular services. That treaty is still out there. We were successful in 1996 to have Canada renounce its signature on that particular treaty. And it took a real fight in the Canadian government. It's the only time in our history that we have renounced a UN treaty. But yet that was enough to make sure that under Canadian law, we would in effect then have a right to go and intervene and try to help a Canadian regardless of how many citizenships that they may have. You know. But there's no easy, I agree with you, and it's becoming more so. But what I should mention one other
fact. You, sir, because I don't have enough time, and I want to make sure that my colleague gets a chance to ask a question.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just actually, for the committee, wanted to provide a verbal notice of motion on a different matter that I'll be moving a subsequent meeting, and that's that the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development invite the Canadian ambassador to China to appear before the committee to explain his recent comments that Canada has more in common with China than with the U.S. And a second verbal notice of motion I wanted to provide that pursuant to Standing Order 108-2, the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development undertake a study on the situation in and status of Tibet, and in particular on whether or not the Government of Canada should actively promote the middle way approach, which calls for a genuinely autonomous Tibet within the framework of the Chinese Constitution. So I wanted to just give verbal notice of those two motions. Do I still have time to ask a question, Mr. Chair?
No.
Okay, sorry about that. Thanks.
Okay, so we've heard those notices of motion. They'll be sent to our committee to review once the timeline is done, so that'll be next week. Mr. Party, this has been a very good session. We could sit here all night and have this discussion. There's many questions to ask, and we hope to ask them of many other witnesses. So on behalf of the committee, I want to thank you very much for your participation, and if there's any information that you think we should see, please feel free to send it to the clerk and we'll distribute it to colleagues here around the table. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for your interest and your attention.
Colleagues, this will take our meeting to an end. We'll see you next week